Since 1965, the United States Air Force has entrusted 4 aircraft with carrying out one of its most crucial, if not craziest, mission types. The F-100 Super Sabre, the F-105 Thunder Chief, the F-4 Phantom II, and the F-16 Fighting Falcon. In light of very recent events, however, it is now safe to say that a 5th aircraft has officially joined this distinguished roster, the F-35 Lightning II. Today we're talking about SEAD, or Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses, and the Wild Weasels. We'll take a look at the development of the Wild Weasel mission, the aircraft and equipment that have executed that mission, and how SEAD tactics have evolved along with those aircraft and weapon systems over the years. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's hop right into it. The catalyst for the entire concept of a designated suppression of enemy air defenses mission can be pinned to a specific date, July 24th of 1965. A U.S. Air Force F-4C flying top cover for a strike package of F-105s over North Vietnam was suddenly shot down by a 5,000-pound missile the size of a telephone pole, nearly 24,000 feet above sea level. This marked the introduction of a new, extremely serious threat to American aviators in the skies over Vietnam, the Soviet-supplied SA-2 Guideline radar-guided surface-to-air missile. With an operational envelope of nearly 80,000 feet and a max speed of over Mach 3.5, the SA-2 was a threat that had to be addressed, and it had to be addressed quickly. Within days, the Air Force and the Navy began planning what would become Operation Iron Hand, the first missions devised specifically to deal with this new SAM threat. The Air Force's arm of the project would eventually become Project Wild Weasel, and for our purposes today, we're going to focus on the USAF side of the coin. To address the specific threat posed by the SA-2, Air Force planners had to understand how the missile system worked and almost reverse engineer tactics that exploited the very functionality of the SAM system. As mentioned, the SA-2 is a radar-guided missile. It relies on ground-based radar guidance commands to find and track targets. SA-2s would usually be arranged in a defense network of 6 missiles paired with 2 separate radar systems. An early warning radar system called P-12, NATO code Spoon Rest, would detect incoming air targets up to 170 miles away. This information would then be passed to a second acquisition radar called SNR-75 Fan Song. This had a shorter range, around 40 miles, but had the capability of determining a target's approximate altitude, speed, and location. Once an individual SA-2 was fired, the computer system connected to the SNR-75 would wirelessly relay steering commands to an airborne missile to intercept a given target. Worth noting, the Soviets had originally designed the SA-2 to target large, high-flying supersonic bombers, and due to its large size and slow initial acceleration, the missile was ineffective below 6,000 feet. So from the get-go, the brains behind the Wild Weasel program knew that the SA-2 had 2 major weaknesses that they could exploit. 1, it required ground radar systems for target detection, and 2, it couldn't hit low-flying targets. The initial plan was relatively simple, but extremely dangerous. Small flights of 2-seat F-100F Super Sabres would fly into an area where surveillance aircraft had spotted an SA-2 installation. Staying low to the deck and using ground masking maneuvers along the approach, the F-100 pilots would occasionally pop up to a high enough altitude where the SAM's early warning radar could pick them up. The backseater in the F-100 was an electronics warfare officer, or an EWO, equipped with a special radar homing and warning receiver. The device detected incoming radar signals, interpreted the frequencies and pulse rates, and gave the EWO a ping in the direction of the radar's source, as well as an idea of the type of radar that was looking at them. The Super Sabre pilot would then drop back down to the deck and course correct towards the enemy radar. This process would be repeated until the SAM site could be visually identified by the F-100 team. The most reliable way to pinpoint the exact location of a SAM battery, however, was to get it to shoot at you. The massive size of the SA-2, combined with the huge flame and smoke trail leading back to the launch site, gave the Weasels a pretty solid idea of the whereabouts of the SAM's origin. After hopefully evading any incoming missiles and descending below the SA-2's effective envelope, the Super Sabre would then mark the freshly revealed target with rockets to be destroyed by a following flight of F-105s armed with traditional ordnance. The Wild Weasel codename bestowed upon these new SEAD missions epitomized the nature of the mission. Like the agile, slender weasel, these small fighters would chase prey right back into their own burrows and destroy them at the source. If this all sounds crazy, that is because it is. The tactic at its core required the F-100 crews to act as decoys, as the SAM sites couldn't reliably be found unless they found you first. The Weasel slogan, WGBSM, was allegedly the response of one of the initial F-100 EWOs upon hearing the details of his new assignment. To put it concisely, You gotta be shitting me. The concern was clearly not unfounded. Weasel tactics required the inherent necessity of surrendering the element of surprise, as well as the requirement to fly below the SA-2's effective envelope, and this placed Weasel pilots well within the range of traditional anti-aircraft artillery that knew they were coming. As a result, the initial Wild Weasel program suffered from high attrition, with 9 out of the original 16 airmen involved in the program MIA, KIA, wounded, or captured after barely a month of operations. Changes were clearly needed, but the viability and proof of concept of the Weasel program was evident. The aging F-100 had proven to be particularly vulnerable in its new Weasel role, and the Super Sabre was substantially slower than the F-105s it was supposed to lead to SAM sites. Testing ultimately led to the adoption of the 2-seat F-105F and later F-105G Thunderchief as the new mount for the Weasels. In addition to improvements on existing radar homing and warning equipment, the F-105s also added a couple new tricks to the Weasel's arsenal, namely electronic countermeasures and anti-radiation ordnance. Electronic countermeasure systems, or ECMs, had been available to a limited extent during the initial Wild Weasel program in /65, but the size and weight restrictions had limited their use to larger aircraft, usually unsuitable for the SEAD role. The heft of the F-105 allowed for the installation of 2 AN/ALQ-105 blisters on either side of the fighter's fuselage, and gave the Thunderchief's crew the ability to essentially overload a SAM's guidance radar with blasts of radio waves, rendering it temporarily useless. In addition, the ECM blisters could create deceptive radar signals, tricking the fan song into effectively tracking a non-existent target. 1966 also saw the introduction of the new AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missile, which for the first time gave the Weasels a weapon that allowed them to independently eliminate SAM radar installations at range. The Shrike was in essence a modified AIM-7 Sparrow air-to-air missile with a new seeker head designed to home in on a radar beam emitted from a target source. Weasel crews, upon locating the general position of a SAM site, could loft an AGM-45 from around 15 miles out. The seeker head on the missile would then chase the fan song's radar waves back to the source and eliminate the eyes of the installation, rendering the SA-2s blind. This leap in technology was not without its drawbacks, however, as the most effective launch angle and position placed the Weasel within the firing range and effective envelope of the SAMs themselves. Beyond this, North Vietnamese SAM crews began to develop new tactics of their own to counter the Weasel threat. Radar operators learned that temporarily shutting down the fan song, for example, would cause an AGM-45 to lose their lock on the target, a lock that could not be reacquired after the initial launch. Despite these improvements, the Wild Weasel mission remained extremely dangerous and costly. 11 of the initial 12 F-105s for the Wild Weasel operators were lost within a month and a half of arriving in theater. But the Weasels fought on, as the merit of the assignment was clear. Suppressing enemy SAM radar sites, whether through outright destruction or serving as a distraction, helped larger strike packages reach and destroy their targets without being pummeled by the ever-increasing number of SA-2s in country. By 1965, the battered Wild Weasels finally received a game-changer in the form of the AGM-78 Standard Anti-Radiation Missile, or STARM. Developed from one of the US Navy's own SAMs, the AGM-78 had an effective range of nearly 60 miles, meaning it could be launched from relative safety outside the range of the SA-2s they were being sent to destroy. Beyond this, the AGM-78s featured a memory function to overcome these new developments in NVA tactics. Even if a fansong operator switched their radar off after an AGM-78 launch was detected, programming inside the STARM kept it on course towards the last previously known location of the target. These tremendous technological updates, combined with a much larger warhead compared to the Shrike, made this latest F-105G Wild Weasel a force to be reckoned with. Thunderchiefs remained in service as Weasels in Southeast Asia up to the end of the war, and by the end of 1968, the effectiveness of North Vietnamese SA-2s had decreased fivefold, thanks largely to the work of the Weasels. Despite US involvement in Vietnam eventually coming to an end in the first half of the 70s, the Wild Weasel program wasn't going anywhere, as far as the US Air Force was concerned. The Weasels had proven their merit, and more upgrades and improvements were on the way to help the force carry on their essential SEAD missions wherever they would be needed next. Due in part to the heavy attrition in Vietnam, the Weasel role fell next to a specialized variant of the F-4 Phantom II, the F-4G. The Advanced Wild Weasel, as it was called, swapped the Phantom's internal cannon for an extremely powerful nose-mounted AN/APR radar homing and warning receiver. In addition, improved digital processing systems allowed Weasel EWOs to have unprecedented threat detection and identification abilities miles beyond what was available to the initial Weasel teams in 1965. The mid-80s also saw an introduction of the next generation of anti-radiation missile, the AGM-88 HARM. The HARM, or High-Speed Anti-Radiation Missile, took all the advancements of the AGM-78 and turned them up to 11. With a standoff range of nearly 150 miles, a max speed of Mach 2.9, and onboard electronic countermeasures, the AGM-88 is a nasty adversary that's nearly impossible to hide from once it picks up a signal. The F-4G Weasels also found themselves a new buddy in the mid-1980s in the form of the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The Weasel program, at its most effective, often came when partner aircraft worked together in hunter-killer teams. From day one, those old F-100s did the weaseling in North Vietnam, spotting SAM sites and teeing them up for the kill for more heavily armed F-105s or F-4s. Despite the independence offered by the new anti-radiation missiles and ECMs, the advantage of a second partner aircraft was still tremendous for Weasel operations. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, Wild Weasel units started pairing F-4Gs and F-16s in hunter-killer teams, with the F-4G doing the weaseling, sniffing out the enemy radar installations, while the more nimble F-16, armed with anti-radiation missiles, went in for the kill. This seemingly odd pairing of third and fourth generation fighters got a real chance to demonstrate its effectiveness in 1991 with Operation Desert Storm. Iraqi forces had more than 16,000 Soviet-produced SAMs spread across nearly 200 sites in Iraq and Kuwait in 1991, and at the time, the skies over Baghdad were considered to be some of the most heavily defended in the world. The Weasels had their work cut out for them, but at this point, American Weasel squadrons knew how to deal with the aging Soviet SA-2s and their younger cousins. When combat operations began in January, 3 Wild Weasel units, often accompanied by F-16 killers, set to work and decimated the Iraqi SAM network with stunning results. In more than 10,000 sorties, coalition aircraft suffered only 42 losses to Iraqi fire, with only a single F-4G lost after running out of fuel returning back to base. The Gulf War air campaign is widely reviewed as an outstanding demonstration of overwhelming contemporary air technology and tactics at work, and the role of the Wild Weasel and the lessons learned in Vietnam surely played a massive role in that success. Even though the F-4 Weasels proved their might in the Gulf War in 1991, the Phantom II platform was starting to get quite long in the tooth after more than 3 decades in service, and by the mid-1990s, it was time for the Phantom to hang it up. The final F-4Gs in service with the Air Force were eventually retired in March of 1996. On their way out, though, the F-4G Advanced Wild Weasels got to pass the baton to a familiar friend, the F-16. Specifically designed and equipped Block 5052 F-16 CJs are the only current formal Wild Weasels in the U.S. Air Force arsenal today. The CJ Vipers feature a special AN/ASQ-213 harm targeting system mounted below the fuselage that allows the F-16 to do it all, so to speak. The extremely high-tech system enables all-weather SEAD operations and helps automate threat detection, allowing the pilot to focus more on tactical awareness and decision-making. For the first time in Wild Weasel history, the SEAD aircraft is crewed by a single individual, and one F-16 CJ armed with AGM-88s can effectively identify, locate, and eliminate enemy SAM systems at range. With the Viper's eventual retirement in the 2040s approaching and divestment in older models already underway, new fighters in the Air Force arsenal will have to step up and take on the SEAD Weasel role. And as we just saw in the last few days here at the time of recording, it seems abundantly clear that that task is now going to the F-35 Lightning II. Unless you've somehow managed to avoid the outside world entirely this week, you're probably aware of the controversial little Uber ride that the US military gave to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro over the weekend. Now, we are not here to talk about the geopolitical ramifications or legality of what happened. This video is already getting long enough as it is. But Operation Absolute Resolve, as we now know it, was probably one of the most overwhelming demonstrations of American air power in the SEAD role that we have ever seen. We still don't know much about the details, of course, as this is very much a developing story, but we do know that over 150 U.S. aircraft were involved in the operation, including F-22 Raptors, F-A-18 Super Hornets, EA-18 Growlers, B-1 Lancers, numerous rotary wing aircraft, and of course, the F-35 Lightning II. Now, the Venezuelan military, not exactly small, over 120,000 reported active duty personnel, and on what paper appeared to be a pretty decent air defense network. But these January 3rd strikes, good lord, at least 11 sites struck to the best of our knowledge right now, including at least 5 Venezuelan air bases. It's unclear if even a single Venezuelan fighter was able to get off the ground to counter these strikes. But we do know, according to U.S. military officials, that not a single U.S. military aircraft or service member was lost during the operation. So from a SEAD standpoint, let's just think about that. U.S. fighters were able to completely shut down Venezuelan air defenses to such an extent that Delta Force operators could helicopter into the capital, pluck the president and his wife out of their compound, and whisk them off to New York. That is bananas. On the equipment front, It's not exactly clear how Venezuelan air defense systems were suppressed and destroyed, though this was most likely done with a variety of aircraft working together. The F-22, as we know, is not a SEAD aircraft. It has air-to-ground capabilities, but in all likelihood, the F-22s were there in a purely air superiority role. Navy EA-18s, as we know, have some tremendous electronic warfare and jamming capabilities, and definitely played a large part in those respects. But I'd be willing to wager that the F-35s involved, particularly the F-35As that we know were sent down from the Vermont Air National Guard, were probably the big weasels in this operation. The F-35 hasn't been battle-tested much by the US, which is a good thing, really, but in the last 6 months or so, we've seen evidence that the F-35s are excelling in opportunities to carry out the wild weasel role. This shouldn't be surprising, really, as the F-35 would be the first weasel ever to feature genuine stealth technology, relying on its extremely advanced AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare system and precision air-to-ground munitions to destroy enemy SAM and radar installations without the need to serve as bait in the traditional wild weasel sense. We do know, based on US reporting, that F-35s were tapped specifically to carry out SEAD missions as part of Operation Midnight Hammer in April of 2025, and were able to successfully clear a path for B-2 Spirits to carry out strikes in Iran. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Osborne, CO of the 34th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron, remarked that his team was able to, quote, employ weapons to great effect against multiple surface-to-air missile sites during the operation, adding that this is the first time anyone has been shot at in 20 years actually carrying out the Wild Weasel mission. It's the first time that we're carrying novel weapons on the F-35. It was cool to see the jet detect and defeat things, to watch it do exactly what it was designed to do. Now, at the moment, we don't know exactly what payloads the F-35s were kitted out with in Iran or in Venezuela, but we do know that both the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy have been developing another advanced anti-radiation weapon, the AGM-88E Extended Range Missile, and that the Navy has confirmed successful operation of the new missile in one of the operations in Yemen last year. From a purely technological standpoint, the F-35 is the most advanced, most capable fifth-generation aircraft in the world that has the ability to carry out this specific role. And while Growlers very likely could get the job done in this instance, the F-35s are probably the only ones that could penetrate that far into Venezuelan airspace without anyone even knowing they were there. I'm sure we'll learn more about the details of this operation as time goes on, but I have a feeling that the Wild Weasel Wikipedia page might be getting some edits in the near future. So, there you have it. A crash course on U.S. Air Force SEAD operations in the Wild Weasels from 1965 to 2026. Thank you for tuning in today, my friends. If you are new here, welcome aboard. And until next time, my friends, be well, happy building. Cheers.